You know how you can tell when your circumstances have taken a sudden and drastic turn for the worse? When 30 days ago, you were the current president running for re-election, and today, you're a speaker who is so irrelevant they gave you the after midnight slot on Monday at the convention, also known as the we have to let this guy speak, but we want as few people as possible to see and hear it slot. To illustrate the point, do you remember who closed out the first night at Woodstock? Of course you don't. Because it was freaking Joan Baez. And let's just call things what they are. There was not one single mud-spattered, slack-jawed 19-year-old hippy-dippy acid freak in that whole wretched assemblage of humanity who saw that lineup for the first night and said, "Groovy, man, I can't wait to rock out to some Joan Baez." And you know why they didn't say that? Because Joan Baez is what you listen to when you want to feel terrible about yourself. For Christ's sake, when she closed the first night at Woodstock, she sang "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" for her first encore number. Who the hell does that? It's a song about a dead slave who hopes he's managed to avoid eternal damnation. Yeah, that'll put a bunch of smiles on those dirtbag hippie faces. The girls will have their shirts off in no time. But having said all that, from the perspective of the organizer, she is a big enough name that if we can get her for this festival, we have to put her on, so we'll just give her the closing slot on the first night. Hopefully most people will have passed out from the combined effects of alcohol and Benzedrine by then. Well, Joe Biden's own party just gave him, at the final convention of his very, very illustrious career, the political equivalent of the Joan Baez slot at Woodstock. When you're taking the stage 3 hours after Jasmine Crockett, safe to say your star has fallen just a little bit, and they made him stay up at least 7.5 hours past his bedtime, which is the biggest crime of all, as far as this reporter is concerned. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we open this episode by acknowledging that we meet here tonight upon the stolen lands of indigenous peoples, and so we recognize and honor the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe, also known as the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. God damn it, I thought I was going to get through this. Potawatomi nations. We acknowledge the many other tribes who consider this area their traditional homeland, including the Miami-a, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Sac and Fox, Peoria, Kaskaskia, Wea, Kickapoo, and Mascoutin. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. And yes, that quote, mangled as it was by the host, was in fact taken verbatim from the land acknowledgement that opened the proceedings at the Democrat convention on Monday night, and then I believe the invocation was then delivered by, I think it was a one-legged pansexual neurodivergent gender non-conforming body positive voodoo witch doctor with two mommies, who is also an Australian Olympic breakdancer. You know what I think my favorite thing is about those dumb land acknowledgements? And these things are very fashionable right now. Everybody is doing them, which you already know if you've been to any sort of a graduation event in the last couple of years. My favorite thing is how, even when they get an honest-to-God American Indian person to read out the acknowledgement, the pronunciation of the tribal names is always, let's say it's a bit of a roller coaster ride. Like there's this moment of sheer white-knuckle terror where the person realizes, shit, I probably should have practiced these before I was on TV. One day, eventually, one of these things is just going to end with the person giving up and walking away when they're halfway through the list, and they're going to say, "Ho-Chunk? The hell is a ho-chunk? Sounds like the name of an obese female rapper. I refuse to believe that's a real thing. Clearly, I have been trolled here, and that's not an actual tribe. And me heap big mad now. God damn it. Personally, the only reason I watched the land acknowledgement was because I very fervently was hoping that they were going to have Senator Elizabeth Warren, the highest-ranking Native American woman in the history of the U.S. government, be the one to read the thing out. And I understand she is quite upset that she wasn't even asked. Word has it, she is really on the warpath over it. I heard she was so taken aback she nearly choked on her powwow chow. Wouldn't that have been great, though? Especially if they had her do it as a surprise and they didn't tell anybody beforehand. The lights slowly fade in and out walks Elizabeth Warren, big chief cheekbones herself, clad in a tasseled buckskin jumpsuit, nice pair of moccasins, some pigtail braids, a headband, a single feather, And I'm just now realizing I've given a perfect description of that fake white Indian impersonator who Marlon Brando sent up to accept his Oscar that one time. That was a real kick in the gut for me. I don't know about you. Many years later, when we found out that the artist we lovingly knew as Sacheen Littlefeather, that iconic champion of Native American activism, was really just a German-Mexican interloper from the Tony suburbs of Monterey County. That one upset me even more than when I found out Iron Eyes Cody was a fucking Italian. But I guess fake Indian opportunists will continue to be with us, so long as the grass grows and the rivers run, and may the Great Spirit help us all. Now, you remember that scene in Anchorman 2, where Brick Tamland is giving the eulogy at his own funeral, and his friends have to spend several minutes convincing him that he's not really deceased? Joe Biden's after-midnight valedictory speech at the DNC kind of felt a lot like that, but I guess it's a comparison that falls apart rather quickly, since in Brick Tamland's case, he had attempted to fake his own death, and he did such a great job that he managed to fool himself, whereas in Biden's case, it was more of a, okay, Grandpa, you get out on that stage when we tell you, you read the exact words on that screen, or else these hostages get it. Maybe it would have been leaning into the joke a little too hard to have a man up with him on stage holding a pistol to his head, but as a practical matter, I think it wasn't too far off from that. And hey, as long as we're doing movie references. You remember the scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they are loading the corpses of the plague victims onto the wheelbarrow, and the old man says, "Wait, I'm not quite dead yet." And his son says, "Yes, you are, you'll be stone dead in a moment." And the old man goes, "I think I'm feeling better." And then the son has to pay the wheelbarrow guy to finish the job for him. Now, if there's truly a fitting cinematic allegory to what we witnessed Monday night, or very early Tuesday morning, I guess, if we're being technical, maybe that is the one that does the job best. Because Joe kept stubbornly refusing to admit he was dead, so Kamala Harris had to bribe Nancy Pelosi to finish him off with a truncheon shot to the back of the head and haul him away in the plague wagon. Come on then, do us a favor. Now, I guess I ought to pause here for a moment of full disclosure, because I haven't actually seen or heard the entirety of the Joe Biden speech. I've only heard a couple of excerpts and read a couple more, but frankly, I think at this point, if you've heard one late period Joe Biden speech, you've heard them all, really. The only variation comes when they pump too much amphetamine into the old codger, and then you get 30 minutes of super angry mouth foaming grandpa instead of the baseline level angry grandpa that you were aiming for. But hey, medicine is an imperfect science. Especially when you were in the same business that our friend Dr. Frankenstein used to be in, namely, the temporary reanimation of individuals who, for all appearances, are otherwise deceased. But seriously, a late period Joe Biden speech? Well, it's a lot like a late period Elvis concert. He's obviously in pretty rough shape. He's slurring his words so badly he can scarcely be understood. He is a sad, pathetic husk of the man he once was, but damn it, he sang all the greatest hits, and he managed to stay on his feet until the end of the show. And boy, did Joe Biden sing those greatest hits. In fact, I don't know if we've ever had all of Joe Biden's greatest hits in one convenient jewel box package like he gave us on this occasion. Obviously, since this is late period Joe Biden, at least 60% of the speech is going to be about how awful Donald Trump is. And you should really take a moment to drink in that aspect of this election, because this is the first and only time in our history when the party in power has attempted to make the election into a referendum on the challenger. Why have we never seen that done before? Well, because it can pretty easily be viewed as a tacit admission from the party in power that they've done a pretty god-awful job, and they damn well know it. Normally, when you're the party in power, you tell the people about all the good things you have done to make their lives better these last 4 years, and about the further good things you're going to do in the next 4 years if the people are nice enough to return you to office. But you can't do that when you're Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. All they can do, and they seem to both understand this pretty well, is to talk about the unconscionable amounts of money they have spent and act like that is the same thing as having achievements. But they don't couch it in such vulgar terms as that, obviously. So instead of stating the plain truth and saying, we have spent you, your kids, your grandkids, and your great-grandkids down the river without a damn thing to show for it, you say something that's more genteel and more palatable, like, We have made historic investments. Which is a very classy sounding way of saying that you have engaged in more reckless, profligate, drunken sailor spending than all prior administrations combined, and it's not particularly close. Because when you use a term like investment, that implies that there is going to be a potential future return on the investment. After all, people don't make investments with the intention of getting back less money than they put in, do they? And the other thing you do is you talk about the bipartisan legislation that you've passed. So, for example, let's say the House is evenly divided and you manage to peel off 2 Trump-hating douchebag liberal Republicans to pass your crazy white elephant boondoggle spending bill. That's okay, because now you can call it bipartisan, which implies, again, falsely, that there is consensus and broad popularity where no such thing actually exists. So once you've finished cooking up the stew of falsehood and deception, what does the finished product sound like? It sounds like this. We've passed bipartisan legislation that makes historic investments in our nation's infrastructure. And of course, the final last bit of subterfuge is the implication that passing a bill that claims to do a thing is the same as doing the thing. So where normal people with a functioning conscience might say, maybe let's not celebrate the infrastructure bill until we have actually built some infrastructure. These people don't give 2 squirts of piss whether any scrap of infrastructure ever gets built. The whole point of the exercise was to be able to say the words, we passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill. It was not ever to actually build infrastructure. So stop being so fucking naive, will you? So yes, in point of fact, if the ability to get passed by razor-thin margins some of the worst, most wildly irresponsible spending bills in world history is what constitutes presidential greatness, then I will be the first commentator to raise my hand and say, you, Joe Biden, are a great president. But you know what I found most awkward of all in this whole awkward thing? When the audience kept interrupting the speech with chants of, thank you, Joe. Because I think even now, in his current enfeebled state, he has still got enough marbles rattling around between his ears up there to understand that, yeah, they're not chanting that because they appreciate my many, many decades of tireless public service. And by public service, obviously, I mean dispatching my degenerate stripper impregnating crackhead son to go pick up bags of cash from various locations around the globe. No, I think they are chanting that because they are so very, very, very happy I dropped out of the race with a gun at my head and a knife in my back. I think they are registering just how delighted they are that they no longer have to pretend they like me and think I'm doing a great job. And who knows, maybe they weren't crazy about the idea of voting for the last living segregationist senator. Could be a little dash of that in there too, who knows? And it's a bold move, really. When you are not only the last living segregationist senator, not only a guy who has bragged publicly more than once about being a senator from a slave state, not only a guy who gave a very lovely funeral oration for a former exalted cyclops of the Ku Klux goddamn Klan, to smear the other party's candidate as a racist when he's not even your opponent anymore. But Joe Biden is a bold guy, as semi-animated cadavers go. And he was bound and determined to fit all those greatest hits on that one CD, so we got the 12,000th repetition of the Very Fine People hoax. A hoax that Joe Biden had debunked right to his face all the way back in 2019 and numerous other times since. But does he give a fuck? Oh, that's a hard no. I think I wouldn't be surprised if this man's dying words were very fine people. Either that or suckers and losers, which, I mean, it's really quite embarrassing to be using any of this stuff at this point, but if we're making this a qualitative exercise, I think the suckers and losers hoax is even more embarrassing than the very fine people hoax. Though neither one really passes the test of basic scrutiny, so we're supposed to believe that one day in 2017, Trump decided to just come out and publicly announce that he sparkly hearts freaking neo-Nazis. That's what happened. And better yet, one day in 2018, while overlooking an American cemetery in France, he randomly decides to exclaim that our doughboys from WW1 were suckers and losers. Yeah, you're serious right now, Joe Biden? Oh, and he did the bloodbath hoax too, naturally. The newest one of the three, but it's built up a pretty impressive reputation for itself. This idea that Trump in the middle of some random campaign speech, decided to go off script and declare that if he loses the election, damn it, he is just going to start murdering people by the bushel fucking basket. The streets are going to flow red with the blood of Trump's enemies if he doesn't get returned to the White House by you, Mr. and Mrs. America. So if you don't wish to be murdered, vote Donald Trump. I'm just saying. I feel like that one could potentially backfire on him, depending on how people choose to interpret it. We do, after all, have no shortage of new voters who came here from places where, if people think a certain candidate is going to kill them if he doesn't win, that makes them more likely to vote for that guy and not less so. And of course, I doubt I have to clarify this for the benefit of anyone who is sufficiently erudite and good-looking to be watching this channel, but just for the sake of excessive thoroughness, Trump's bloodbath remark was a reference to what China would potentially do to us in the automotive market if the election should happen to go in a certain non-Trump direction, which is 100% screamingly plain as day obvious to anybody who has bothered watching the whole clip or reading the whole quote. Just as the reality of the Very Fine People hoax is equally obvious to anyone who has watched that whole clip or read that whole quote. And just as the reality of the Suckers and Losers hoax is self-evident to any adult with a functioning prefrontal cortex. These are lies. Joe Biden knows they are lies, but nevertheless, he chose to exit the stage of American politics by telling them just one more time. Even when he's not the candidate anymore, he can't help himself from tearing off a chunk of his favorite comfort food. Ordinarily, people don't exit the stage of public life with a series of bitter partisan attacks. But I guess Joe Biden is no ordinary fellow, is he? A man who wanted to be remembered as a statesman or a diplomat or a devoted public servant might have chosen to strike a conciliatory tone in his last major address, maybe even a magnanimous one. But Joe Biden chose emphatically not to go that route. He chose to go out with hatred and venom and bitterness, vomiting out the same old lies that have formed so much of his stock in trade for so long and doing it right up to the very end. And since I can't help myself from closing with one more film reference, if this was Joe's idea of riding off into the sunset at the end of the picture, he pulled it off about as well as Dr. Marcus Brody at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And if you don't get the joke, you are banned from the channel. Goodbye. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.